Now, every year, September 10th is marked for observing World Suicide Prevention Day, started by the International Association for Suicide Prevention with the support of World Health Organization in 2003. Hundreds of events and campaigns are organized in several countries globally. In Namibia, suicide, its causes, awareness around it, and its prevention are observed during the National Suicide Prevention Month, which is September. Now, to share some more details on this, I'm joined by Bernadus Harageib, who is a social worker and development practitioner. Stephen, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us here on the Daily Roundup.
Thank you so much for having me, Nina.
Just to start with, Stephen, statistics show that there is a high rate of suicide in men when you compare it to women. What is the main cause of this, in your opinion?
So that statistics is correct. There is a 3.5 percentage higher likelihood of men committing suicide, and versus women, and that's not just a Namibian issue, but I think a global issue. Namibia's statistics is slightly even higher than the global average. Now, there are a couple of issues, and it's a complex subject matter, suicide, because there are a couple of contributing factors, both on a sociological level, where it's around the social context within which suicide happens, but also thinking around the physiological. But when we think about suicide in men and the mental health axis, it has to be within the broader scope of health axis for men. You do realize that a lot of the times, behavior around help seeking for health for men is ridiculously low. We don't seek for example, HIV treatment. We don't go to GP checkups. If we do go for a checkup, normally depression, for example, is underdiagnosed for men because normally it will be associated with work stress, or just say the challenges, maybe some challenges at work or at home. So we don't even think about mental health support services for men. And then, of course, the overall issue around the investment in mental health services also as a national issue and also global issue is still quite an underfunded space. And we talk about mental health and suicide prevention, but when we think about the comparatives around the legislative frameworks, but also the investment of resources and finances to actually roll out this work, unfortunately, the case still remains that this remains an underfunded issue. And because it's underfunded, many of the people in mental health practitioners and providers are stretched and are not able to, of course, provide the support and services to a wide-ranging number of people. So I think we have to think about the context of suicide prevention within the bigger conversation around mental health and the bigger conversation around health access for men specifically.
Stephen, sometimes suicide can be seen as, it can be caused by depression, and depression that is caused by mental health issues. And it's really so tricky to be able to tell when somebody is depressed. Because as much as we know about it, the telltale signs aren't always there. So how do you pick up that somebody might be suicidal? What are some of the most common behaviors and warning signs for suicide?
So each person, of course, the signs may be different. And it's really what you're looking for is change in behavior. And behavior that is now stretched out over a period of time, which starts to cause changes in how they engage, basically in work, family, change of mood, for example. Maybe some people sleep a lot more and others people stay up a lot later, for example. So what has the person's normal behavior been, and what changes has happened over a period of time? So when you think about diagnosis of mental health issues, particularly around depression, it is not something that you can kind of diagnose in 2 or 3 sessions or weeks, right? It's about a longer period of time we're actually investigating and thinking about what is actually changing this person's posture in the world that they find themselves in. So that's a bigger thing that you're looking for. Then the second one is around what they call active suicide ideation versus passive suicide ideation. Active suicide ideation is where somebody wants to commit suicide, but has a plan in place, right? To say, this is how I want to do it, and this is kind of why I'm thinking about it, and I have a plan in place to execute it.
Right.
Whereas passive suicide is somebody who's thinking about suicide, but doesn't necessarily have a plan, doesn't necessarily want to see how that's going to work out yet. So there are different levels and high risk factors that we need to consider when you're thinking about assessment of suicide. But what I would like to raise, though, is that any form of suicide ideation, we have to flag to healthcare professionals.
Yes.
If there's not a healthcare professional in your area, then to raise it to the police that can be able to then investigate that suicide ideation. I think a lot of times we think about it and say, maybe it might be somebody trying to get attention, or it might be somebody just saying this over and over. We've heard this before. We must take all of those cases as seriously as possible and provide the necessary support. So without going into the details of what the specific symptoms might be, is really what we're looking for is shift in behavior that is over a long period of time, normally over like a couple of months to 6 to a year, that we want to kind of investigate and really giving that support, mental health support intervention.
Stephen, of course, having conversation and discourse around, mental health issues and suicide is important, and we are doing that. But do you think Namibia is doing enough to raise awareness when it comes to suicide?
I think we need to do more. We're doing great around raising campaigns to speak about suicide. We're raising awareness around what suicide is. There's a couple of services, civil society organizations that are available that provide the services, but there is more that needs to be done. When we think about our state structures, we only have about limited mental health support services through the state, which is the mental health facility based in Windhoek and in the north, which is also overwhelmed by the services that needs to be accessed, and they're not having the capacity to do so. Two, even the qualified level of social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists in country is still very little. And so we need to be able to invest more to be able to increase the number of mental health practitioners there. So scholarships needs to be provided to be able to increase that. Many of these people in the healthcare professions, especially in the mental health space, are not getting the necessary jobs because there's not enough capacity to be able to absorb in the labor market, but the demand, unfortunately, is still there.
Right.
So what are we doing to be able to absorb these guys in the job market? And then thirdly, of course, the mental health policy that is being updated, as well as the Mental Health Act in Parliament, which needs to speak to the realities of where we are right now on a legislative level.
Right.
It has to be propelled a lot more.
Stephen, thank you so very much for joining us this evening for this very important discussion. Thank you for your time.
Fantastic.
That was Bernadus Harageib, social worker and development practitioner, speaking to us about the month of September, which is known as World Suicide Prevention Month.